For 15 years, I lived in the shadows of my husband's success, watching him bask in the glory of achievements that were, in truth, as much mine as his. My name was Sophia Chen Morrison, though most people knew me simply as David's wife's Faye, the quiet woman who attended company parties, smiled gracefully at business dinners, and never spoke unless spoken to. They saw me as the perfect trophy wife, beautiful but unremarkable, educated but not threatening. What they didn't know was that behind my serene exterior lay a mind that had been orchestrating David's rise to power from the very beginning. I met David Morrison during our MBA program at Stanford. He was charismatic, ambitious, and utterly convinced of his own brilliance. I was the daughter of immigrants, quietly brilliant, but taught from childhood that success came through careful observation and strategic silence. While David commanded attention in every classroom, I absorbed information like a sponge, analyzing market trends, studying behavioral economics, and developing strategies that would later become the foundation of his tech empire. Our romance was swift and passionate. David was drawn to my beauty, and what he perceived as my gentle, non-competitive nature. I was drawn to his confidence, and his potential that I knew I could help him realize. We married 6 months after graduation, and David immediately dove into the tech world with the kind of reckless enthusiasm that would have destroyed him within a year if I hadn't been there to guide him. The early years of our marriage were our most honest. David would come home frustrated from failed pitches or problematic negotiations, and I would listen, analyze, and quietly suggest solutions, maybe approach them from the sustainability angle instead. I'd say while making dinner, "Have you considered that they might be more concerned about data security than profit margins?" These weren't casual observations, they were carefully crafted strategic insights, based on hours of research I conducted while David assumed I was simply managing our household. His first major success came from what he still believes was his brilliant pivot into cloud security solutions. The truth was, I had spent weeks analyzing market data and competitor vulnerabilities, then carefully planted seeds of insight during our evening conversations. I overheard Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store talking about how worried she is about hackers. I'd mentioned casually. It made me think about how scared business owners must be about their data. David would nod thoughtfully, and by morning, he'd present my insights as his own sudden epiphanies. This became our pattern. I would research, analyze, and strategize in secret, then feed David carefully crafted suggestions disguised as innocent observations or wifely concerns. He never questioned where these insights came from in his mind. They were simply proof of his own genius, and I was content to let him think so. After all, his success was our success, and I believed that our partnership, though unacknowledged, would last forever. As Tech Vanguard grew from a small startup to a mid-size company, my role became more complex but remained invisible. I attended industry conferences as David's silent companion, but while he schmoozed and networked, I studied our competitors' identified market gaps, and observed the subtle power dynamics that determined who succeeded and who failed in Silicon Valley's ruthless ecosystem. Our home office became my secret command center. While David thought I was organizing charity events or planning dinner parties, I was deep diving into market research, analyzing quarterly reports of our competitors, and developing comprehensive business strategies. I maintained detailed files on every major player in the tech industry, their weaknesses, their ambitions, their personal lives, and their business vulnerabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me that David's greatest strength, his ability to inspire confidence and command attention, was also his greatest weakness. He was so focused on being seen as brilliant that he never bothered to look behind the curtain of his own success. He genuinely believed that his insights came from his superior intellect, never suspecting that his devoted wife was the architect of his empire. When Tech Vanguard landed its first major corporate client, a Fortune 500 company seeking comprehensive cybersecurity solutions, David celebrated as if he'd won the lottery. What he didn't know was that I had spent 2 months researching that company's specific vulnerabilities, studying their previous security breaches, and crafting a proposal that addressed their exact needs. I had fed him the information piece by piece, disguised as casual conversations about current events and news stories. "Did you see that article about data breaches in the financial sector?" I'd ask over breakfast, sliding a carefully selected news story across the table. It is terrifying how vulnerable these big companies are. David would scan the article, and I'd watch as the wheels turned in his head, combining my research with his presentation skills to create what he believed were original insights. The years passed, and our life settled into a comfortable routine. David's company grew exponentially, and with it, his ego. Success made him increasingly arrogant and dismissive, not just toward employees and competitors, but toward me, the man who had once valued my opinions, even when he didn't realize they were strategic advice, began to see me as nothing more than a beautiful accessory to his successful life. Sophia, you wouldn't understand the complexities of B2B negotiations, he'd say when I tried to offer suggestions during his phone calls. This isn't like planning a charity luncheon. I learned to bite my tongue, to smile and nod, and to save my insights for more subtle delivery methods. But something inside me began to change. The partnership that had once felt collaborative, even if unacknowledged, started to feel like exploitation. David's treatment of me grew increasingly dismissive. At business dinners, he would introduce me with phrases like, "This is my wife, Sophia. She keeps the home fires burning while I conquer the tech world." He'd pat my hand condescendingly and turn back to his colleagues, dismissing me from conversations about industry trends and market strategies, fake conversations that I had helped him prepare for with hours of behind-the-scenes research. The final straw came during Tech Vanguard's most crucial negotiation, a potential merger with global tech industries that would make David a billionaire. I had spent months analyzing global tech's financial statements, studying their corporate culture, and identifying the key pressure points that could make or break the deal. As always, I fed this information to David through carefully crafted conversations, disguised as innocent curiosity about his work. But this time, something was different. David had become increasingly secretive about his work, often taking calls in private and working late at the office. I assumed it was the stress of the merger negotiations until the night I overheard a phone conversation that shattered my world. I had gone to his home office to bring him coffee and found him speaking in low, intimate tones that I recognized all too well. Through the barely open door, I heard him say, "Don't worry, sweetheart. Once the global tech deal closes, I'll have enough money to leave Sophia and start fresh with you. She has been dead weight for years. Anyway, beautiful decoration, but absolutely no business sense whatsoever." The woman on the other end of the line giggled, a sound I recognized as belonging to Jessica Walsh, his 28-year-old personal assistant. "I can't wait to be with someone who actually understands my ambitions." David continued, "Sophia is sweet, but she is just a housewife. She could never comprehend the complexities of building a business empire." I stood frozen in the hallway, coffee cup trembling in my hands as the man I had secretly guided to success for 15 years dismissed me as worthless dead weight. The rage that filled me was unlike anything I had ever experienced, not the hot, explosive anger of a moment, but a cold, calculating fury that demanded strategic action. That night, after David fell asleep beside me with the contentment of a man who believed he had fooled the world, I sat in our kitchen and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront him, scream at him, or beg him to reconsider. Instead, I was going to show him exactly what 15 years of dead weight could accomplish when it stopped hiding in the shadows. My first call was to Richard Chen, my cousin, who ran a small but aggressive tech consulting firm in Seattle. Richard had always suspected that I was more involved in David's success than anyone realized, and over the years, he had occasionally hinted that his company could use someone with my analytical skills. Until now, I had always deflected his suggestions with gentle excuses about my duties as David's wife. "Richard," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my heart, "remember that offer you made about joining your team? Is it still open?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds before Richard responded. "Sophia, are you serious? I've been hoping you'd make this call for years. What changed your mind?" "Let's just say I am ready to stop being invisible," I replied. "But I need this to be completely confidential until I am ready to make my move." Over the next several weeks, I began my secret transition from David's shadow to Richard's silent partner, working under a carefully crafted consulting agreement that hid my identity behind layers of legal entities. I began applying my analytical skills to help Richard's clients in ways that would have been impossible if David had known what I was doing. The beauty of my situation was that David remained completely oblivious to my activities. He assumed I was still the devoted housewife, managing our social calendar and organizing charity events, while I was actually conducting deep-dive competitive analyses for Richard's clients. My 15 years of studying the tech industry from the inside gave me insights that no traditional consultant could match. My first major success came when I helped Richard's firm win a contract with Mid-Atlantic Financial, a banking consortium that had been struggling with cybersecurity issues. Using my knowledge of Tech Vanguard's strategies and weaknesses, I crafted a proposal that not only addressed Mid-Atlantic's needs, but highlighted the shortcomings of their current security provider FAE, which happened to be one of David's major clients. Within 2 months, Richard's firm had not only won the Mid-Atlantic contract, but had positioned itself as a serious competitor in the cybersecurity consulting space. David, focused on his global tech negotiations and his affair with Jessica, never noticed that several of his smaller clients were being systematically poached by a previously unknown Seattle-based firm. As David's betrayal became more blatant, FAE late nights that were clearly dates, weekend busyness trips that coincided with Jessica's social media posts from luxury resorts FAE, I channeled my pain into my work with Richard. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment of being treated as invisible furniture in my own home, became fuel for my strategic fire. The global tech negotiation, which I had helped orchestrate through months of carefully planted insights, was reaching its climax. David was more arrogant than ever, convinced that his brilliant strategies and negotiation tactics would secure him the deal of a lifetime. He had no idea that I had been quietly working with Richard to position his firm as Global Tech's preferred security consultant for their post-merger integration. The irony was exquisite. While David focused on the headline, grabbing merger that would make him rich, I was positioning myself to capture the ongoing consulting contracts that would provide sustained revenue for years to come. David was playing for a one-time jackpot. I was building an empire. 3 months after I began working with Richard, David came home with champagne and an announcement that made my blood run cold. "Sophia, darling," he said, his voice dripping with condescending affection, "I have wonderful news. The global tech deal is almost finalized, and I've been thinking about our future." He poured 2 glasses of champagne and handed me one with the ceremonial flourish of a man who believed he was being generous. "I've decided that once this merger is complete, we should consider a trial separation. I know this might come as a shock, but I've realized that we've grown apart over the years. You deserve someone who can give you the attention you need, and I need to focus entirely on my business, without the distraction of maintaining a social life." The lies flowed from his mouth so smoothly that I almost admired his audacity. He was framing his betrayal as a kindness to me, his abandonment as a generous gift of freedom. In his mind, he was the successful businessman graciously releasing his simple housewife to find happiness with someone more suited to her limited capabilities. "I understand this is difficult," David continued, setting down his champagne and taking my hands in his with practiced sincerity, "but I want you to know that I'll be very generous in our settlement. The house, a comfortable monthly allowance, full health insurance FAE, you'll never have to worry about money. All I ask is that you don't make this complicated with lawyers and demands for business assets. After all, Tech Vanguard is entirely my creation, built through my vision and my work." I looked into the eyes of the man I had loved and supported for 15 years, the man whose success I had architected from the shadows, and felt a crystalline moment of clarity. He genuinely believed that I had contributed nothing to his empire except my presence at social events. In his mind, I was a beautiful but empty vessel, who had been privileged to live in the reflection of his brilliance. "Of course, David," I said, my voice as smooth as silk, "I would never want to complicate your life or interfere with your business. You've worked so hard for your success." The relief on his face was almost comical. He had expected tears, arguments, emotional scenes that would require him to manage my feelings while juggling his affair and his merger negotiations. Instead, I was giving him exactly what he wanted: FAE, a graceful exit from our marriage, with no messy complications. "I am so glad you understand," David said, kissing my forehead with the patronizing affection one might show a well-behaved child. I knew you'd be reasonable. This is really the best thing for both of us." That night, after David fell asleep with the contentment of a man who had successfully managed a delicate situation, I made a series of phone calls that would set my final strategy in motion. By morning, I had not only accepted a formal position as Richard's partner, but had also initiated contact with 3 of David's major competitors, offering my consulting services under the carefully constructed identity I had been developing for months. The next several weeks were a masterclass in strategic warfare disguised as domestic tranquility. While David planned his new life with Jessica and celebrated his impending merger success, I systematically dismantled his competitive advantages by sharing my inside knowledge with his rivals. I didn't steal proprietary information or violate any legal agreements. I simply applied my deep understanding of his strategies, his weaknesses, and his blind spots to help his competitors outmaneuver him in the market. The beauty of my approach was its subtlety. David's business began experiencing small setbacks that seemed like normal market fluctuations. A key client chose a competitor's proposal by a narrow margin. A promising partnership fell through due to philosophical differences. A regulatory challenge emerged that caught his legal team unprepared. None of these setbacks were catastrophic individually, but together, they created a pattern of declining momentum, just as David needed to demonstrate strength for the global tech negotiations. Meanwhile, my work with Richard's firm and other clients was generating extraordinary results. Companies that implemented my strategic recommendations consistently outperformed their competitors, secured better contracts, and navigated market challenges with remarkable success. My reputation, carefully hidden behind consulting agreements and shell companies, began to spread through Silicon Valley's elite networks. The turning point came during a global tech board meeting that David thought would finalize his merger deal. What he didn't know was that I had spent weeks cultivating relationships with global tech's key decision makers through my consulting work, subtly demonstrating my strategic capabilities, while highlighting the growing instability in David's business performance. When Global Tech CEO, Margaret Holloway, called to request a private meeting with David, he assumed it was to finalize contract details. Instead, she delivered news that shattered his entire worldview. Global Tech was withdrawing from the merger due to concerns about Tech Vanguard's recent performance and strategic direction. "We need partners who demonstrate consistent excellence and strategic foresight," Margaret explained, her voice professional but firm. Recent market analysis suggests that Tech Vanguard may have been riding on past successes rather than developing sustainable competitive advantages. David was devastated, but his worst shock was yet to come. Margaret's next words hit him like a physical blow. "However, we've been extremely impressed with the strategic consulting work we've received from Chen Strategic Solutions. We'd like to offer them a comprehensive partnership agreement that includes equity participation and long-term strategic planning responsibilities." The name Chen Strategic Solutions meant nothing to David, but the implications were staggering. Not only had he lost the deal that was supposed to make him a billionaire, but Global Tech was choosing to partner with an unknown consulting firm instead of his established company. That evening, David came home in a state of confused rage, demanding answers that I couldn't provide without revealing my secret. "Something isn't right, Sophia," he said, pacing our living room like a caged animal. "It is like someone has been working against me, undermining my deals and stealing my strategies. But that is impossible, Faye. No one could know enough about my business to do that kind of damage." I watched him struggle with the impossible puzzle, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and growing paranoia. The man who had built his identity on being the smartest person in the room was finally encountering a problem he couldn't solve through charm and bluster. "Maybe you should hire a private investigator," I suggested gently. "If someone is really working against you, a professional might be able to figure out who it is." David seized on this suggestion with desperate enthusiasm, hiring an expensive security firm to investigate what he was convinced was a coordinated attack on his business. While he wasted money on investigating phantom enemies, I continued my methodical dismantling of his empire, one strategic consultation at a time. The end came faster than I had expected. Within 6 months of my decision to step out of David's shadow, Tech Vanguard had lost 60% of its client base to competitors who seemed to anticipate his every move. David's attempts to reverse course only accelerated his decline, as his increasingly desperate strategies played directly into the hands of rivals, who had been prepared for exactly those responses. The final confrontation happened on a Tuesday morning in December. David burst into our kitchen where I was having my morning coffee, his face twisted with a rage and confusion I had never seen before. "I know someone is sabotaging me," he shouted, slamming a folder of documents onto our marble countertop. "These aren't random market forces or bad luck, Faye. This is coordinated, systematic destruction of everything I've built. Someone with insider knowledge is feeding information to my competitors." I looked up from my coffee with the calm expression of a woman who had nothing to hide. "That sounds terrible, David. Have your investigators found any evidence?" "That is just it," David said, his voice cracking with frustration. "They can't find anything concrete. It is like fighting a ghost face, someone who knows everything about my business, but leaves no fingerprints." He began pacing again, running his hands through his hair with manic energy. "The worst part is, whoever's doing this is brilliant. They're not just stealing clients, Faye. They're systematically outmaneuvering me with strategies that seem designed specifically to counter my strengths. It is like they know exactly how I think." "Maybe they do," I said quietly. David stopped pacing and stared at me. "What do you mean?" I set down my coffee cup and looked directly into his eyes for the first time in months. "Maybe whoever is doing this has been watching you very closely for a very long time. Maybe they know your strategies because they helped you develop them." The color drained from David's face as the impossible possibility began to take shape in his mind. "Sophia, what are you saying?" I stood up slowly, maintaining eye contact with the man who had dismissed me as dead weight while building his empire on my hidden insights. "I am saying that for 15 years, I watched you take credit for strategies and insights that came from my research, my analysis, and my understanding of the market. I am saying that while you saw me as beautiful decoration, I was actually the architect of your success." David's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. That is impossible. You are a housewife. You don't know anything about business." "I have an MBA from Stanford, David, the same program where we met, where I graduated with higher grades than you did. I've been reading industry publications, analyzing market trends, and developing strategic insights for 15 years. The difference is that I let you present them as your own brilliant ideas." The truth hit David like a physical blow. I watched as 15 years of memories rearranged themselves in his mind. As he began to recognize the pattern of our evening conversations, the strategic insights disguised as wifely observations, the market analyses hidden behind innocent questions about his day. "Every major deal you've won, every strategic decision that made Tech Vanguard successful, came from insights I provided," I continued, my voice steady and calm. "The CloudSec pivot that launched your company, my idea. Based on market research I conducted while you thought I was planning dinner parties, the global tech merger strategy that almost worked, my analysis of their corporate structure and decision-making processes." David collapsed into a kitchen chair, his face ashen. But you never said anything. You never took credit or demanded recognition." "Because I loved you," I said simply. "I believed we were partners, that your success was our success. I was content to be your secret weapon, as long as I was valued and respected, but you didn't value me, Faye. You saw me as worthless decoration, dead weight that you couldn't wait to discard." The silence stretched between us as David processed the magnitude of his miscalculation. Finally, he looked up at me with a mixture of horror and desperate hope. "Sophia, if what you are saying is true, then you can help me fix this. We can rebuild Tech Vanguard together as real partners this time." I smiled at him, with the same gentle expression I had worn throughout our marriage, but now it carried a different meaning. "David, I am rebuilding, just not with you." The revelation that followed was perhaps crueler than anything I could have planned. Over the next hour, I systematically explained how Chen Strategic Solutions, Faye, my partnership with my cousin Richard Faye, had become Silicon Valley's most sought after consulting firm by applying the same analytical methods I had used to build Tech Vanguard. I described how Global Tech and half a dozen other major companies had chosen to work with us instead of him, how his former clients were achieving unprecedented success under my strategic guidance. You see, I said, as David sat in stunned silence, I didn't destroy your business out of revenge. I simply stopped building it for you and started building my own instead. All those insights and strategies that made you successful, they're still out there in the market, Faye. They're just working for your competitors now. The final twist of the knife came when I handed David a business card with elegant gold lettering. Chen Strategic Solutions, Sophia Chen, Managing Partner. I kept my maiden name for the consulting business. I explained. I thought it was important to make sure that my success would be clearly attributed to me this time. David stared at the card as if it were written in a foreign language. Sophia, please. We can work this out. I made mistakes. I can see that now, but we can fix this together. You said. You loved me, Faye. Doesn't that count for something? I felt a moment of genuine sadness for the man who had shared 15 years of my life, but it was the sadness one feels for a stranger's tragedy, not the pain of personal loss. I did love you, David, but I loved a man who valued my mind as well as my beauty, who saw me as a partner rather than an accessory. That man never really existed, did he? The divorce proceedings were swift and surprisingly amicable, largely because David no longer had any significant assets to fight over. Tech Vanguard's value had plummeted so dramatically that our prenuptial agreement, which had seemed so protective of David's interests, now worked in my favor. Meanwhile, my consulting business was flourishing beyond my wildest expectations. The industry publications that had once ignored my existence, while praising David's brilliance, now featured Chen Strategic Solutions as a case study in innovative business consulting. Margaret Holloway from Global Tech became one of my strongest advocates, publicly crediting my strategic insights with their company's remarkable turnaround in competitive positioning. 6 months after our divorce was finalized, I attended the Silicon Valley Business Excellence Awards ceremony. Faye, not as someone's wife, but as a nominee for Consultant of the Year. David was there too, desperately networking and trying to rebuild his reputation, his presence now more pitied than respected. During the cocktail hour, he approached me with the kind of determined smile that had once charmed investors and clients. Sophia, you look incredible. Success certainly suits you. I turned to face the man who had once dismissed me as dead weight, noting how the stress of his failures had aged him, how his once commanding presence had diminished into something smaller and more desperate. Thank you, David, I said politely. I hope you are doing well. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about a potential collaboration, he said, lowering his voice conspirationally. I've been thinking about how we could combine our expertise, maybe work together on some projects. After all, we made a great team once. The audacity of his proposal was breathtaking. Even after losing everything, even after learning the truth about our partnership, David still believed he could charm his way back into my success. He had learned nothing from his downfall, except that I was more valuable than he had realized. I looked at him for a long moment, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in our entire relationship. He wasn't evil, just profoundly limited by his own ego, and blind to the contributions of others. In his mind, my success was simply evidence that we should be working together again, that he could ride my insights back to the top. David, I said gently, I spent 15 years being your silent partner. I am not interested in going back to that arrangement. Before he could respond, Richard appeared at my side with a warm smile and a possessive hand on my shoulder. Sophia, they're about to announce the Consultant of the Year award. Are you ready? As we walked toward the main ballroom, I could feel David watching us, finally understanding that the woman he had dismissed as worthless decoration had not only survived his betrayal but had thrived beyond his ability to comprehend. When my name was announced as the winner, the applause was thunderous and genuine. As I walked to the podium to accept my award, I caught sight of David in the audience, his face a mask of confusion and regret. My acceptance speech was brief and gracious, thanking my clients for their trust and my team for their dedication. But as I looked out over the audience of Silicon Valley's most successful executives, many of whom were now my clients, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. For 15 years, I had been invisible, my contributions hidden behind another person's name and reputation. Now I stood in the spotlight, recognized and celebrated for my own achievements. I had learned that sometimes the greatest victory is not revenge, but simply refusing to remain in shadows any longer. The story could have ended there, with my triumph and David's downfall serving as a satisfying conclusion to years of being undervalued and dismissed. But life, as I had learned, rarely provides such neat endings. Over the following months, as my consulting business continued to grow and my reputation solidified, I began to receive offers that would have been unimaginable during my marriage. Board positions, speaking engagements, merger and acquisition opportunities that could make me not just successful, but genuinely powerful in Silicon Valley's ecosystem. The final validation came when Global Tech offered me a position as their chief strategy officer, with an equity package that would make me a major shareholder in one of the tech industry's most influential companies. Margaret Holloway delivered the offer personally during a private dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant. "Sophia," she said, raising her glass in a toast. 5 years ago, if someone had told me that Tech Vanguard's quiet housewife would become the most sought after strategic mind in Silicon Valley, I would have laughed. Now, I can't imagine making a major business decision without your input. As I accepted her offer and we shook hands on what would become one of the most lucrative consulting agreements in industry history, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. I had started as a young woman who believed that love meant hiding her light to make her partner shine brighter. I had ended as a woman who understood that true partnership requires mutual respect and recognition. David had taught me inadvertently that no one's success is worth sacrificing your own identity. His betrayal had been painful, but it had also been liberating, forcing me to step out of the shadows and claim the recognition I had always deserved. The last time I saw David was at a technology conference, 2 years later. He was working for a small startup now, his reputation too damaged to attract major opportunities. When our eyes met across the crowded exhibition hall, I saw not anger or resentment, but a kind of bewildered recognition, as if he was still trying to understand how the quiet woman who had once served him coffee had become the keynote speaker at the industry's most prestigious event. I didn't approach him, and he didn't approach me. There was nothing left to say between us. He had gotten exactly what he thought he wanted: freedom from his deadweight wife, and the chance to build his success on his own terms. The fact that his success had crumbled without my hidden support was simply the market's honest evaluation of his actual capabilities. As for me, I had learned that silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it is strategy, sometimes it is preparation, and sometimes it is simply waiting for the right moment to let the world hear your voice. I had been the silent partner long enough. Now it was time to speak, and when I did, the entire industry listened. The greatest revenge, I discovered, wasn't destroying the man who had betrayed me. It was succeeding so spectacularly on my own terms that his betrayal became irrelevant, a footnote in the story of my rise, rather than the defining moment of my life. I had spent 15 years in David's shadow, but shadows can only exist when there is a light source behind them. When I finally stepped into the light myself, I discovered that I had always been brighter than I knew. Today, when young women approach me at conferences and ask for advice about building their careers while supporting their partners, I tell them this: partnership should amplify both people's success, not require one person to diminish themselves for the other's glory. True love doesn't ask you to hide your light, it celebrates your brilliance and helps you shine even brighter. And when they ask what I would do differently, if I could go back and change my story, I tell them absolutely nothing. Every moment of invisibility, every dismissed insight, every condescending pat on the head, had taught me something valuable about my own strength and resilience. David's betrayal hadn't broken me, it had finally set me free to become the woman I was always meant to be. The silent partner had found her voice, and Silicon Valley would never be the same.